This is Cs231N, and I'm Professor Fei Fei Li from the Computer Science Department. I will be co-teaching this quarter with Professor Ihsan Adeli and my graduate student Zain. So you'll meet them, as well as our wonderful TA team that you will meet later. So I just want to get started. Yeah, so this is what excites me, that AI has become such an interdisciplinary field, that what you're going to learn in this class, of course, it's very technical. It's about computer vision and deep learning, but I really do hope that you take it to whichever discipline you work in and are passionate about and apply it. So we hear a lot about the field of AI. So how do we position computer vision and the scope of this class? If you consider AI as this big bubble, computer vision is very much a integral part of AI. Some of you have heard me saying that not only vision is part of intelligence, it's a cornerstone to intelligence. Unlocking the mystery of visual intelligence is unlocking the mystery of intelligence. But one of the most important tools, mathematical tools, to solving AI is machine learning, or some people call statistical machine learning. And this is exactly, what we will be talking about. Within the field of machine learning, in the past 10 plus years, we have seen a major revolution called deep learning. And I'll explain a little bit of what deep learning is. Deep learning is a set of algorithmic techniques that is built around a family of algorithms called neural networks. And so if you ask me to pinpoint the scope of this class, will not be able to cover the entirety of computer vision, will not be able to cover the entirety of machine learning or deep learning, but we're going to cover the core intersection of these two fields. And of course, just like the entirety of AI, computer vision is becoming more and more a interdisciplinary field. A lot of the techniques we use, as well as the problems we work with, intersect with many different other fields like natural language processing, speech recognition, robotics, and AI as a whole is a field that intersects with mathematics, neuroscience, computer science, psychology, physics, biology, and many application areas from medicine to law to education and business and so on. So what you will get for this lecture, our first lecture, is I'll give a very brief history of computer vision and deep learning, and then Professor Adeli will go over the overview of this course and lay the groundwork of how this course is set up and what our expectations are. So, the history of vision did not begin when you were born or humanity was born. The history of vision began 540 million years ago. You might ask, what happened 140 million years ago? Why are we pinpointing a relatively specific date or year in evolution? Well, it's because a lot of fossil studies have shown us there is a mystery period called Cambrian explosion. The fossil studies showed about 10 million years in evolution during that time, which is a very short period of time for evolution. We see the explosion of animal species in the fossil study, which means before Cambrian explosion, life on Earth was pretty chill. It was actually in the water. There's no land yet, no animals on the land yet, and animals just float around. So what caused this explosion in animal speciation? There were many theories, from climate to chemical composition of the ocean water, but the most one of the most compelling theories was the onset of eyes. The first animal, a trilobite, they gained photosensitive cells. So the eyes we were talking about were not sophisticated lenses and retinas and nerve cells. It was literally a very simple pinhole. And that pinhole collected light. Once you collected light, life is completely different. Without senses, life is metabolism. It's very passive. It is just metabolism, and you come and go. With senses, you become an integral part of an environment that you might want to change. You might want to actually survive in it. Some animals becomes or plants become your dinner, and you become someone else's dinner. So evolutionary forces drives intelligence to evolve because of the onset of senses, because of the onset of vision, along with haptics or tactile sensing. Those are the two most, the oldest senses for animals. So that entire course of 540 million years of evolution of vision is the evolution of intelligence. Vision as one of the primary senses of animals drove the development of nervous system, the development of intelligence. Almost all animals on Earth today we know of have vision or use vision as one of the primary senses. Humans are especially visual animals. More than half of our cortical cells are involved in visual processing, and we have a very complex and convoluted visual system. So this is what excites me to enter the field of vision, and I hope it excites you. So now let's just fast forward from Cambrian explosion to actually human civilization. Humans does innovate, and not only we see, we want to build machines that see. So here's a drawing by a couple of drawings by, of course, Leonardo da Vinci, who was just forever curious about everything. He studied camera obscura for how to make seeing machines. In fact, that even way before him in ancient Greece and in ancient China, we have seen documents about thinkers, philosophers thinking about how to project objects through pinholes and to create images of objects. And of course, in our modern life, cameras have truly exploded. But cameras are not enough for seeing. Just like eyes are not enough for seeing. These are apparatus. We need to understand how visual intelligence happens. And that's really the crux of this course. So let's just talk about a little bit of the history that brought us to this intersection of deep learning and computer vision. So let me go back to the 1950s. The 1950s, a set of very critically important experiments happened in neuroscience, and that was the study of the visual pathways of mammals, especially the seminal work by Hubel and Wiesel. They used electrodes to put into live cats, anesthetized, and then they study the receptive field of neurons that are in the primary visual cortex. What they have learned, to their surprise, are two very important things. One is that neurons that are responsible for seeing in the primary visual cortex have their own individual receptive fields. Receptive fields means that for every neuron, there is a part of space it actually sees. It's not all the space. It's not very big. It tends to be a very confined patch of the space. And within that space, it sees specialized patterns, simple patterns when when you're measuring from the early part of the visual pathway. And by and large, in the primary visual cortex, which is around here in the back of the head, not near your eyes, it's oriented edges or moving oriented edges. So every neuron, some neuron will be seeing an edge like this, some will be seeing an edge like this or this. And that's how vision, the computation in the brain begins. The second thing they learned is that visual pathway is hierarchical. As you move beyond the visual pathway, the neurons feed into other neurons. And the neurons in the higher layers or deeper layers of the visual hierarchy have more complex receptive fields. So if you begin with oriented edges, you might feed into a corner receptor. You might feed into an object receptor. I'm overly simplifying, but that's the concept, is that neurons feed into each other, and then they create this big network of computation. Of course, most of you sitting here are already thinking the way I've been describing this will have a profound impact on the modeling, the neural network modeling of visual algorithms. Let's keep going. That's year 1959. It's very early studies of seeing. By the way, about 30 years later, maybe not quite, 20-something years later, Huber and Wiesel won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for studying this, uncovering the principles of visual processing. Another milestone in the early history of computer vision was the first PhD thesis of computer vision. Most people attribute Larry Roberts in 1963 writing the first PhD thesis just studying shape. And this is a very, very character representation of the world. And the idea is that can we take a shape like this and understand the surfaces and the corners and features of this shape? It's intuitive that humans do. So an entire PhD thesis is devoted to this. And that's the beginning of computer vision. And around that time, in 1966, an MIT professor created a summer project in MIT and asked to hire a few undergrads, very smart ones, to study vision. And the goal was pretty much solve computer vision or solve vision for one summer. Of course, just like the rest of the history of AI, we tend to be over optimistic of what we can do in a short period of time. So vision did not get solved in that summer. In fact, it has blossomed into an incredible computer science field. If you go to our annual conferences every year now, it has more than 10,000 people attending. But 1960s is where, between Larry Roberts' PhD thesis as well as this kind of project, we in our field consider that the beginning of the field of computer vision. A seminal book was written in the 1970s by David Marr, who unfortunately died too early. He wanted to study vision systematically and start to consider how visual processing happens. Even though this is not explicitly stated, but there is a lot of inspiration from, neuroscience and cognitive science. He was thinking about, if you look at, if you take an input image, how do we visually process and understand the image? Maybe the first layer is more like edges, just like we saw. He calls it primal sketch. And then there is a 2.5D sketch, which, separates different, depth, of the objects in the image. So the ball is the foreground object, and then the grass here. Oh, no, not grass. The foreground here is the background. So he does these 2.5D sketch. And then finally, he believes, David Marr believes the grand holy grail victory of solving vision is to know the entire full 3D representation. And that is actually the hardest thing of vision. Let me digress for 20 seconds because, if you think about vision, right, for all animals, it's an ill-posed problem. Since the early trilobites who collected light from underwater, light, the world, through photons, is projected on something on a surface more or less 2D. At that time, it was just, some patch in the animal. But right now, for us, it's a retina. But the actual world is 3D. So recovering 3D information, the entire 3D world from 2D images is the fundamental problem nature had to solve and computer vision has to solve. And mathematically, that's an ill-posed problem. So what did nature do? Anybody have a wild guess? Yes. The trick that nature did is develop multiple eyes, mostly two. Some animals have more than two. And then you triangulate information. But two eyes are not enough. You actually have to understand correspondences and all that. We'll touch on some of these topics, but there are other computer vision classes in Stanford offers that also specifically talk about 3D vision. But the point is, it's a very hard problem. And we have to solve it. Nature has solved it. Humans have solved it, but not to extreme precision. In fact, humans are not that precise. I roughly know the 3D shapes, but I don't have, geometric precision of all the shapes. So that's one thing to consider and appreciate how hard this problem is. Another thing that is very different for computer vision and language is actually something philosophically subtle. Language doesn't exist in nature. You cannot point to something and say there's language. Language is a purely generated thing. I don't even know what word to use, right? It comes through our brain. It's generated. It's 1D. It's sequential. So this actually has profound implication in the latest wave of Gen AI algorithms. This is why these LLMs, which is outside of the scope of this class, is so powerful because we can model language that way. But vision is not generated. There is actually a physical world out there respecting the laws of physics and materials and all that. So vision has very different tasks. So I just want you to appreciate the difference between language and vision and actually, frankly, appreciate nature, how it solved this problem. Okay, let's keep going. 1970s, the early pioneers of computer vision without data, without really much of powerful computers, without the mathematical advances we have seen today, are already beginning to solve some of the harder problems of computer vision. For example, recognition of objects. Here in Stanford, one of the pioneering work is called Generalized Cylinders by Rodney Brooke and Tom Binford. And ironically, Rodney Brooks today is on campus, actually, some part over there giving a talk at the robotics conference. And he went on to become one of the greatest roboticists of our time and was founder of Roomba and many other robots. And then not very far from us in another part of Palo Alto, researchers have worked on these also compositional models of human body and objects. And then in the 1980s, digital photos start to appear. At least photos start to appear, and people can digitize that a little bit. And then there are some great work in edge detection. You look at all this and probably feels a sense of disappointment, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of trivial to get some sketches and edges, and it's not really going anywhere if that's how computer vision, works at that time. And in fact, we're not so wrong. That was around the time, before many of you were born, that we entered AI winter. The field entered AI winter because the enthusiasm and hence funding for AI research has really dwindled. A lot of things didn't deliver. Computer vision didn't deliver. Expert systems didn't deliver. Robotics didn't deliver. But under the hood of this winter, a lot of things, a lot of research start to grow from different fields like computer vision, NLP, robotics. So let's also look at another strand of research that had a profound implication in computer vision. Is that cognitive and neuroscience continue to blossom. And what is really important, especially for the field of computer vision, is cognitive and neuroscience is starting to point to us the North Star problems we should work on. For example, psychologists have told us there's something special about seeing nature, seeing real world. This is a study by Irv Biederman, who shows that the detection of bicycles on two images differ depending on if the images are scrambled or not. Think about it. From a photon point of view, these two bicycles land in the same location on your retina, but somehow the rest of the image impacts the viewer seeing the objects in the target object. So there is something telling us that seeing the entire forest or the entire world impacts the way we see objects. It also tells us visual processing is very fast. Here's another direct measure of how fast we detect objects. This is an early 1970s experiment showing people a video. And the task for the subject is to detect the human in one of the frames. I suppose every one of you have seen that human in one of the frames. But think about how remarkable your eyes are or your brain is, because you've never seen this video. I didn't tell you which frame the target object would appear. I did not tell you what the target object would look like, where it is, its gestures, and all that. Yet you have no problem detecting the humans. So that is, and on top of that, these frames are played at 10 hertz, which means you're seeing every frame for only 100 milliseconds. And this is how remarkable our visual system is. In fact, Simon Thorpe, another cognitive neuroscientist, have measured the speed. If you hook people up in EEG caps and show them complex natural scenes and ask human subjects to categorize scenes from animals without versus scenes without animals, hundreds of them, and then you measure the brain wave, it turned out after 150 milliseconds of seeing a photo, your brain already has a signal of a differential signal that categorizes. You might not be so impressed because compared to today's GPUs and modern chips, 150 milliseconds is really orders of magnitude slower, but you gotta admire our wetware, our brain, our neurons don't work as fast as transistors. 150 milliseconds is actually really fast. It's only a few hops in the brain in terms of neural processing. So yet again, this is telling us humans are really good at seeing objects and categorizing them. In fact, not only we're so good at seeing objects and categorizing them, we even develop specialized brain areas that have expert ability in recognizing faces or places or body parts. And these are discoveries by MIT neurophysiologists in the 1990s and early 21st century. So all these studies tell us, wow, we should not just be studying these kind of character shapes or the sketches of images. We really should go after important fundamental problems that drives visual intelligence. And one of those problems that everything has been telling us is object recognition. Is object recognition in natural setting. There's a lot of objects out there in the world, and studying this is going to be part of the unlocking of visual intelligence. And that's what we did as a field. We started by looking at how we can separate foreground objects from background objects. This is called recognition by grouping in the 1990s. Keep in mind, we're still in AI winter, but research is actually happening and progressing. And then there is, studies of features, and this is, some of you might still remember like SIFT features and matching. And when I entered grad school, the most exciting thing was face detection. I remember that first year in my grad school, this paper was published, and 5 years later, the first digital camera used this paper's algorithm and delivered automatic face focus because of face detection. So things start to work and be taken into industry. And then around early 21st century, a very important thing start to happen is internet start to happen. When internet start to happen, data start to proliferate, and the combination of digital cameras and internet start to give the field of computer vision some data to work with. So in the early days, we're working with thousands of images or tens of thousands of images to study the visual recognition problem or the object recognition problem. So you've got data sets like Pascal Visual Object Challenge or Caltech 101. So that was, I'm going to pause here, and this is where the first thread of computer vision start to progress. And you might be wondering, why is she pausing? Because I'm going to come back and talk about deep learning. So while, this field of vision was progressing through neurophysiology to computer vision to cognitive neuroscience to computer vision again, a separate effort is going on in parallel, and that eventually became deep learning. It started from these early studies of neural network, things like perception, and people like Romanhart started to, work, and of course Jeff Hinton in his early days started to work with a small number of artificial neurons and look at how that can process information and learn. And you've heard people like the great minds like Marvin Minsky and his colleagues working on different aspects of this perception. But Marvin Minsky did say that perceptions cannot learn these XOR logic functions, and that caused a little bit of a setback in neural network. Well, things continue to progress despite the setback, and one of the most important work before the first inflection point is this neocognitron work by Fukushima in Japan. Fukushima hand-designed a neural network that looks like this, so it has about 6 or 7 or 5 or 6 layers, and then he kind of designed the different functions across the layers, which you will learn more, that more or less was inspired by the visual pathway that I was describing. Remember the cat experiment, from simple receptive field to more complicated receptive field? And he was doing that here. The early layers have simple functions, and then the later layers have more complex functions. And the simple ones, he called it convolution, or he uses the convolution function, and the more complex one, he was pulling the information from the convolution layers. So neocognitron was really an engineering feat, because every parameter was hand-designed. There are hundreds of parameters. He has to just meticulously put them together so that this small neural network can recognize digits or letters. So the real breakthrough came around that time in 1986 is a learning rule. That learning rule is called backpropagation. It's going to be one of our first classes to show you that Romanhart, Jeff Hinton, and they took neural network architecture and introduced a error correcting objective function, so that if you put in some input and know what the correct output is, how do you take the difference between what the neural network outputs versus the actual correct answer, and then propagate the information back so that you can improve the parameters along the neural network. And that propagation from the output back to the entire neural network is called backpropagation. It follows some of these basic calculus chain rules, and that was a watershed moment for a neural network algorithm. So one of the most, and of course, we're still smack in the middle of AI winter. All this work was happening without public fanfare, but of course, in the world of research, these are very important milestones. One of the most earliest applications of this neural network with backpropagation is Yann LeCun's convolutional neural network, made in the 1990s when he was working in the Bell Labs. And what he did is just created a slightly bigger network, about 7 layers-ish, and made it good enough with great engineering capability to recognize letters. And it was actually shipped to some part of the U.S. postal offices and banks to read digits and letters. So that was a application of early neural network. And then Jeff Hinton and Yann LeCun continued to work on neural network. It didn't go very far because despite these improvements and tweaks of this neural network, things more or less just stalled. You know, they collected a big data set of digits and letters, and digits and letters kind of was quasi-solved in terms of recognition. But if you put the system through, you know, the kind of digital photos that the neuroscientists were using to recognize cats and dogs and microwaves and chairs and flowers, it just didn't work. And a huge part of this problem is the lack of data. And lack of data is not just an inconvenience. It's actually a mathematical problem because these algorithms are high capacity algorithms that actually needs to be driven by lots of data in order to learn to generalize. And there is some deep mathematical principles behind these rules of generalization and model overfitting. And data was underappreciated, was underlooked, because most people are just looking at these architectures. They did not realize that data is part of the first-class citizen for machine learning and deep learning. So this is part of the work that my lab, my students and I did in the early 2000s, that we recognize this importance of data. We hypothesized that the whole field was actually missing this, underappreciating the importance of data. So we went about and collected a huge data set called ImageNet that has 15 million images after cleaning 1 billion images. And this 15 million images were sorted across 22,000 categories of objects. We actually studied a lot of the cognitive and psychology literature to appreciate that 22,000 images 22,000 categories were roughly in the order of the number of categories that humans learn to recognize in the early years of their life. And then we open sourced this data set and created an ImageNet challenge called the Large Scale Visual Recognition Challenge. We curated a subset of ImageNet of 1 million images, or 1 million plus images, and 1,000 object classes, and then ran an international object recognition challenge for many years. And the goal is that we ask researchers to participate, and their goal is to create algorithms. It doesn't matter which kind of algorithms, and then we'll test you on your algorithm's ability to recognize photos and see if you can call out these 1,000 object classes as correctly as possible. And here are the errors, right? Like first year we run this competition. The algorithm, the best performing algorithm's error was nearly 30%. And it's really pretty abysmal because humans can perform under, like, say, 3% error.